And good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday brunch. We have our guests, David Henig and BowlerHatMan, and of course, great host, co-host Alex from Political X. So, guys, let's start with David. David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't already know who you are, which is probably almost nobody?
Infamy, and good morning, David Henning. Sometimes known as a trade specialist, occasionally critical of government, but that's just in my waking hours. Although you may, if you were following me last night, you may have seen a worrying trend towards Eurovision commentary instead. My day job is criticising the government's trade policy. I used to work for the government until a few years ago. The thing was, I knew something about trade. I now get a lot involved in the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think we'll be coming back from that. And very important, just to balance this call out, I'm from Lancashire. I just thought I'd throw that one in for the benefit of. Sorry, BowlerHatMan, you were going to want to say something.
Yeah, we're gearing up for another War of the Roses right now.
There is actually disputed territory between Lancashire and Yorkshire.
All I can say is, in the future Republic of Yorkshire, we will just annex Lancashire, and it'll all be fine. I'll all be forgiven.
Why else it won't be.
BowlerHatMan, this has been, I think, your second time on the show, so maybe for people who haven't seen you the last time, can you give just a little quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, A up, as they say up in Yorkshire. Hi, I'm BowlerHatMan, resident Labour Party moaner, encourager, supporter, member of my local Labour Party. It's interesting times at the moment, but yeah, I like to talk about politics bizarrely because I have a bizarre fascination with it, and of course I'm lucky that when you go online you find other people who are also bizarrely fascinated by politics as well, and sometimes you look at politics, as I'm sure me and David already had today. Sometimes you look at politics and you just go, that would be funny if it wasn't happening to us. And I've said many times, you look what's been happening in like America with Trump and you just go, God, that's so funny. And now it's stuff's happening over here and you're like,
it's like a parallel
moments. Yeah.
It's like a twisted mirror universe, isn't it? I mean, there's so many parallels with Trump and Boris, both populist, both lacking understanding of how to run a country, both quite enjoying dividing the country in half and sitting over the destruction. It's pretty concerning.
Fun times. That's the best way to look at it. Fun times, as they say.
Actually, who would be worse? Before we get into the topics of today, who, in your opinion, who would be worse to have, Trump in charge in Britain or Boris Johnson?
Oh, Trump. Say what you will about, Boris Johnson. I think Trump would be infinitely worse if you were literally given that binary choice of Boris or Trump. I would go with Boris every single time because I think there was just no clear understanding, and given the fact that Trump wanted to bomb Mexico, it came out a couple of days ago. Could be quite interesting if you had, Trump in power at the moment and just said, can't we just bomb Ireland or something like that? That would be a bit worrying if you had a prime minister who just said, let's bomb Ireland or let's bomb the EU. That'll teach them.
Isn't Boris Johnson eligible to be US president?
He is.
Yes, he was born there.
He's born there, but I think he's got to live there as well for 12 years to
He'd have to move. He could stand down here, move to America for 12 years. What a prospect! I think whoever's the president of the US, either of them is the worst one because they can do a lot more. They can do a lot more damage. Just to be honest, thank goodness it was Biden when Putin struck. Actually, Biden actually did quite a good job of getting people together. Everyone thinks he's a doddery old so and so. So he doesn't get any credit for it. He is a doddery old so and so, but he actually, thank goodness he was the president at that point.
It doesn't bear thinking about what would have happened. It doesn't bear thinking about, but yeah.
We have a
Sorry,
super chat. Valerio. Thanks so much, Valerio, for that super chat. Hi everyone. What's next in Northern Ireland and Boris and Starmer? Well, we'll get to those in a moment, I think. I'd like to start off with the Queen's speech. What's your reaction to the Queen's speech? We'll start with David. The good and the bad.
I wasn't listening to it. I mean, my first reaction was, why does Prince Charles have to wear all those medals? And he looks like a complete idiot. But that's, okay. You wanted some political content. You didn't want, a 70-year-old man finally gets the chance of the big job and ruins it by, looking like, someone who bought a load of medals from a second-hand store or something.
He looked a bit like a North Korean general, didn't he?
Yeah. But anyway, in terms of the content, there's 38 bills in this Queen's speech. So, they used to say it's 20. There's 38. And between them, they amount not to a hill of beans. Nobody can work out whether there's any actual substance. Apparently, this guy, David Canzini, who's the new advisor in Number 10, apparently told him to take out anything, he didn't like or that wasn't conservative or something like that. So there's actually nothing of any substance there. There's 38 bills, apparently, most of which are designed to... as ever, to get one over the libs, stoke up the culture war. There's no substance at all. There was nothing on cost of living. Boris Johnson said, we'll do something on cost of living. I'm going to do it with my Chancellor. And the Treasury came back and said, when? What? We've never heard of this. It was pretty shambolic, actually, which is kind of in keeping with this government. But anyway, Alex and BowlerHatMan can now defend the government, as I know that they want to.
Yeah, we're unbiased here, obviously.
Yeah,
go ahead, BowlerHatMan.
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of people said it. A lot of other commentators said it. It said they felt that it felt very sort of end of regime-y, that they'd run out of. That everyone's been saying they've run out of steam. And I agree. As David said, there was a lot of guff, but no substance. The big two worries for me. And again, I brought this up on, my own channel. The big two worries for me are the Brexit Freedoms Bill. What's going to be in that? Of course, we don't know until we actually see it. And of course, the other one is the British Bill British Bill of Rights. Those to me are easily the two big worries. And because we haven't actually seen any indication of what could be in these bills, what's going to be said as like what they intend to do with them, who knows what could be in them. But needless to say, I think those certainly the British Bill of Rights could be quite controversial.
I think it's reasonable to say that, there can always be content. Oh, look, there was already content in the last lot of stuff that a lot of people didn't like. I'm afraid that's the UK system of government does tend towards the bills for no particularly good reason other than you can do bills, you need to do bills, and let's do them, and they then have some nasty stuff in them.
Alex, do you want to say something about the Queen's speech?
Yeah, it's all pretty nasty, isn't it? I mean, human rights is the human rights stuff. I mean, it can't be entrenched. We haven't got a codifiable system. The system of Parliament doesn't allow that. Commons is meant to be sovereign, and that means that I can't see how you could codify a Human Rights Act. I think it's just this attempt to get rid of the ECHR, and the irony of that is that we pretty much established the ECHR, European Court of Human Rights. So, I mean, you've heard Nigel Farage rabbiting on about it in the background as well, going, we've got to get rid of this European thing. And I don't think there's any traction with the public. They're like, we're sick of dealing with getting rid of European stuff. Hasn't done us any good so far. I think the other concerning thing is the education stuff. I think they're going to really actually hammer SEND students, special educational needs students. That's what it's actually going to hit, because it seems like they want to persecute people who don't have full attendance, and schools don't have the funding, the finance, and a lot of them probably because of the league system. Actually, I'm going to be careful here. The league system doesn't exactly enamor schools towards helping other students out, because it doesn't help their league score in grading. And from what I can see of what they're intending to do with the education stuff, actually looks like they're going to persecute special educational needs students. I'll give one extreme example. I can't say extreme, but one example of one of my students from the past couldn't go into physical school because they would have to change every single light bulb in the school because he had an issue with the lighting. Can you imagine a school being able to take down every light bulb and refit just for one student? It's not going to be in their interest to do that, and especially with budgets that are so tight that we're getting reports coming to the National Education Union saying they can't afford toilet roll, they can't afford paper, they can't afford pencils, which sounds extreme, but it's not. Unfortunately, the education bill doesn't, in the Queen's speech, doesn't do anything to help those needs. It's almost horrible to say this, but maybe it was actually slightly better under Gavin Williamson. And who would believe I'd ever have those words come out of my mouth?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. David stunned there in silence. What have I just heard?
Well, you said you had to be on both sides of the argument.
No, I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
I'd have to be remiss not to bring this up. There was the MP for Rother Valley recently tweeted this fun tweet out, saying that it was fantastic news that 3 of his schools in Rother Valley had been given the Conditional Improvement Fund. So these are schools which are having to now compete with other schools, not just in Rother Valley, but the rest of South Yorkshire, for basic, maintenance stuff in schools. So if you've got a leaky roof, well, you now have to, compete against other schools to get maintenance funds to fix that stuff.
But okay, so this is the bigger thing with all of this, lots of bills and whatever, but none of which, actually, it's always a weakness in the UK political system. Lots of bills. What's really the problem here? I can't see a GP. My school, the school roof is leaking. My eldest is about to start GCSEs, and there's been chaos with various teachers coming and going at various times, not at all COVID related, and basically all that sort of day-to-day stuff is getting worse. And I think that's where there's nothing in the Queen's speech. Well, there probably never was going to be. But I'm not convinced, if I'm being bluntly honest, and I'm an equal opportunities critic, I'm not terribly convinced that I see Labour, hammering that home very much either. Competing for schools. I mean, the worst thing is that's almost become accepted, cross-party accepted, that schools should compete for funding to fix leak roofs. It's like,
but it's almost. But it also sounds a bit like the food banks issue, where, yeah, we have food banks in our city, in our town. Look how great we're doing. No, that's a bad idea. Or it's not good to have more and more food banks. What was it this week? There was a Tory councillor cutting a ribbon and smiling at a food bank. Yeah, look, we're opening a food bank.
And then having a buffet as well in a food bank, and it's like, well, that certainly sends the wrong message, doesn't it? It's like there's a disconnect somewhere, and it's really difficult to find where really that disconnect's happening. And I think you saw it at the local elections, because the local elections, I don't know how it was for you guys, your turnout. Barnsley's local election, their turnout was literally 23%, and that's practically nothing. And that's all of Barnsley's. When you go into like the individual wards, you start to see some really low numbers, and I think it's because people just don't understand how important like local politics is. That's why I've started to talk about it more and more on my channel, because people don't understand. If you go to like a local council, if you've got a problem with a landlord, you don't go to your MP, you go to your local councillor first. There's all sorts of stuff you should go to them for. And I've spoken to my MP, Dan Jarvis, just, on this, and he says, number of times he has to redirect people to like councillors, because he's an MP and, he can help with that stuff. But most of the time it's like, we need to speak to the local council on this. And I think it's trying to really hammer home that importance, because you say for school maintenance, who's responsible for school maintenance? It's your local council.
Yeah.
So
but is there also this problem that people just are resigned to the, oh, well, look, there's a leaky roof, there's nothing we can do. Or I've seen like videos online of council houses which have black mold up and down the walls. There's a guy on Twitter who posts a lot of content about that. And, people are, I've contacted the council. I've been contacting the council for 2 years now, and they've done nothing. I'm not criticizing the councillors, and I'm not criticizing the council because I know that they have less money and they have access to less money as well, and it's more difficult for them to raise finance. But maybe a lot of people are just, look, there's nothing we can do. That's it.
Well, allow me to help with that despair. Let me pull my book out. This is called Paint Your Town Red, and I am a massive advocate for this book. This is basically a lot of what Labour local councillors are now starting to do. They're now starting to sort of move towards this trend of local community wealth building. And I think moving towards those types of ideas are fantastic. And even in this book, it tells you how you can get involved. So if your council's not doing this, well, it goes, well, here's how you run for local council. Oh, you've missed an election. Well, here's what you can do to go to your local council to raise these types of questions, to start these types of, projects kicking off. And I'm more and more convinced now that we need to have what's going on and get people to understand just how important it is to be involved in your local council. Because I guarantee you, like, when was the last time you went to a local council meeting? Like, there's a lot of people out there who have probably never been to one in their entire lives. And yet it's so important that people get involved with this type of stuff. And, I'm a massive advocate of people getting involved in their local politics. That's why I joined the Labour Party. And I always say, go join your local political party, whether it's you, even if you want to join the Conservative Party, I don't care. You're getting involved. And to me, it is that importance of getting involved. And I don't think enough people realize just how important it really is. But yeah, that's my evangelizing done today.
I do somewhat kind of blame Labour Party messaging for the last sort of 10, 15 years, because it sort of goes further and further away, and I see this in America as well, actually, it goes further and further away from real people's lives. Keir Starmer wants to provide security for everyone. Look, I don't know what security is, and most people hearing it probably don't know what security is. They do know that, that if they can't get a GP, their kid's school has had 3 different teachers in one subject in a term or whatever it is. You've got to pin this back down onto real stuff that is happening, away from sort of abstract notions that vote Labour and you will get security, or vote Conservative and you will have a culture war. Neither of them are much use, and I don't necessarily blame the 23%. I don't know what was happening in Barnsley, but it's not much use to talk in those terms when you don't have a clue what it actually means. So there's some very good books out there on political language as well. And something I try and do in my work is turn it from trade, that boring stuff, to trade. It actually affects all of us, and this is how it affects all of us. And I just think that I would like to see more of that from our politics.
But can I just to respond to that? I think this is something that maybe Johnson and maybe Commons as well were very successful with. They were able to, and obviously it was all a lie, but this idea of getting Brexit done, this was Boris Johnson's response to everything. Like you can't get an NHS doctor's appointment, get Brexit done. The bins are not being collected, get Brexit done. And I'm not suggesting that the Labour Party lie to people, but maybe they need something. I don't mean a slogan, but they need something that resonates on the national level, but also on the local level. I don't know what that is, but they need to, hire Dominic Cummings or something. But they need to find something that hits, that Starmer can talk about, that can be replicated on the local level. Otherwise, as you said, he's talking about something very high level, like security, or we're going to make the country better or something like that. But or make Brexit work. But we'll get to that in a moment.
Just before we move on, because I can feel we're going to move on a bit. Again, if you are right seriously, you want to get involved with like local politics, or you want to make sort of changes and you want to do stuff, paint your town red. It follows sort of the Preston model, where it follows what they did, and Preston books a lot of that sort of the national trends. It's got lower employment, higher sort of wealth gains when it comes to sort of people employment and what they earn, because again, it's all sort of based on some very socialist, very socialist stuff. So yeah, if you are interested, I can't recommend this book enough. And yeah, just get involved. That's the message I always say. Go out and get involved. If you want to make a change, you've got to start locally. I think localism, is going to become a more of a watchword, I think, as we go forward.
Is that book got some sort of similarity or basis around cooperatives? Because you said, look, right, yeah. So I'm a big advocate of Mondragoon. You heard of it?
Yes. Well, in fact, again, an opportunity for me to evangelise. I was really happy that we got the Labour candidate in for the Mayor of South Yorkshire, because Dan Jarvis set up a local cooperative business unit, where essentially, if you want to set up a cooperative business, there is now a regional run unit that will help you set up a cooperative business and will help businesses move into creating a cooperative model. So I'm really, really happy that we've got that in sort of South Yorkshire, because it's the only such unit that exists. And not a lot of people even realise that. Not even a lot of people, even in South Yorkshire, realise that exists. And again, that was set up by sort of Dan Jarvis. And luckily, we got the Labour guy in, because he said he was going to sort of continue working on that. And luckily, of course, the Conservative guy said, I'm going to get rid of that. That's a massive waste of money. And you're like, well, so yeah.
Just for anyone who doesn't know about Mondragoon, then, it's a company that's been around for, I believe, now about 70 years. It's in the Basque Country. It's the biggest company in the Basque Country. That's northern Spain. I think it's the 10th biggest company in Spain. And essentially, the system's run democratically. You vote for your chairman every year. You vote for your CEO every year. You vote for your board of directors every year. And it's total company involvement. And you can't make big changes without going through a vote. So you can't get in a system of like, and there's also a limitation on wage. So the CEO can only get as much as, it depends on the company, but just for argument's sake, it's 10 times the amount of the lowest paid worker, which means that wealth distribution is more acute. It's not exaggerated with one person getting, 1,000 times as much as the lowest paid worker. And if you go into the Basque Country, you look around, you speak to everyone, everyone's really positive about it. If you go to the areas that run specifically by Mondragoon in the Basque Country, not only have they started off with fridges, but they build all sorts of industrial equipment. There's some controversy there. But they also run schools, they run banks, and it's all along a similar model with a company size of a maximum of about 500, because they came to the conclusion if it's any bigger, you can't democratically run it efficiently. It's too big for its own good. But not much poverty in those areas either, and not huge wealth gaps like we have here. But the problem in the UK is, and this is just my layman's interpretation, is that the system itself seems to be at a polar opposite. You've got essentially a large amount of money coming in from the banking sector, but you've also got a huge socialist industry developed with the NHS. And it almost feels as if the Conservatives are yanking against it. I've just found out my local hospital has had an entire department privatised. I think it's the A&E department, because they then don't have to take responsibility for getting sued for any problems that might arise. But it's a massive issue that's taking place in this country. And I think Mondragoon and similar sort of cooperative policies definitely get to the crux of solving it, especially the wealth gap. But the economic sector of the UK is pretty intense. I can see, David, do you want to say something?
No.
All right. So, Max, shall we go on to the next topic?
I just want to read out some super chats before we go on to the next topic. Good morning, guys. Keep up the good fight. That's from Oliver. Thanks so much. Alexander says, sadly, the Hunger Games of education funding, next affordable housing. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes there. So I'd like to move on to Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Maybe David, maybe we can skip David. He doesn't know anything about that.
Yeah, I'd like not to go on to Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol. I mean, and I don't know how you guys cope with this. We're coming up 6 years now. 6 years. In 106 years' time, people will be doing the same thing, and not us by then. Okay. Now, shall we move on to Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Just like that, professionals. That's how we do it here, professionally.
Yeah, well, by then you should have had a lot of practice. We've already had a lot of practice. Anyway, sorry.
So, David, do you think the DUP will? So, at the moment, the DUP have refused to to take part in the executive in Northern Ireland because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. They claim that it needs to be fixed or scrapped. Do you think the UK government is going to bow to the DUP, or, as we've heard, probably Boris Johnson is flying to Belfast tomorrow to speak some sense to the DUP? Yeah.
Okay, I mean, let's put a couple of scenarios here. Scenario one: Boris Johnson flies to Northern Ireland. He gathers together all parties, and businesses in Northern Ireland as well, and he says, "Right, let's find a way that we can all, we can work together. We know we'll have disagreements, but we'll kind of sit down. It'll take a while. We'll come out with some kind of reasoned positions. We'll set up processes. We're going to fix this protocol." Or number two, he sits down, gets a photo up with the DUP, and says, "It's all the EU's fault. I blame them." Which one do we think is more likely? We know the answer, and that tells you don't start with the DUP because they get a bad press, much of it deserved. But they were, they spotted in 2019 that what the Northern Ireland Protocol was going to do, and Boris Johnson's still saying no, it's not going to do that. So throughout this entire process, Johnson has obfuscated, obstructed, claimed that he's going to do something, blustered, threatened, backed down repeatedly, stirred up the DUP, then backed down again. There was one figure from Northern Ireland on one poll, which had only, I think it was 4% of the Northern Ireland population. It may have even been 2% who trusted the UK government on this. You can't fix anything with that, and that's the key number here. Boris Johnson's going to fly to Northern Ireland. Well, excuse me, nobody thinks you have anything to offer here, and until you do have anything new to offer, you're just making it worse. It's my totally unbiased and untutored opinion on it.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question, David. So we heard a lot about the reason why Johnson was put in was because May's Northern Irish backstop was awful. It was completely unacceptable. But from what I've heard, if you took like Boris's deal and May's deal, they're almost exactly identical, like word for word. Like, how close are they in that?
No. It's even worse than that. So Theresa May actually rejected a plan that would have had what was called at the time an Ireland-only backstop, in which Northern Ireland and the Republic would be in the same sort of zone, and she said that's not acceptable to the UK. She agreed with her on that, and so what Boris Johnson did in his great triumph of October 2019, was to accept what the EU had long ago put forward, but not as a backstop this time, but as a front stop. So it's actually worse. This was pretty obviously what he'd done in October 2019, and as I say, we're now 2.5 years after he did that, refusing to accept what he did, what the consequences were, to own the consequences, and instead just said, "Oh, it's the fault of the EU for trying to enforce this particularly badly or particularly onerously." Which rather obstructs the issue or the fact that EU officials aren't actually in Northern Ireland enforcing this. It's being enforced by UK government and Northern Ireland government officials. It's all in the text. I keep it hand to hand, the Northern Ireland Protocol. I have the entire withdrawal agreement here. I did send it to you guys. I hope you've read it all. I'm going to test you later. It's all in here. They signed up to it. They had an impact assessment. Faisal Islam, frequently you can go back to the impact assessment that the internal, government officials prepared in October 2019, which says there will be barriers, Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So until the government sort of starts facing any kind of this reality. Every time they say it's all their fault, we're going to go to the US and persuade the US it's all the EU's fault. And the US normally is not the biggest fan of the EU. The US just go, are you mad? You signed up to this. This was to protect, the Good Friday Agreement. You're making a mess of it. Why don't you start, trying to actually sort it out? And we get more bluster, more threats, and etc., etc.
So I suppose this comes down to now 2 questions, because I think it'll be interesting to see what you think. So the first one is either A, Boris Johnson intentionally signed this deal with no intention of following it through and fully intended just to chuck it anyway. Or he signed up to the deal, hoped that it would work, and then if it didn't work, he could just chuck it anyway.
Well, I'd go with a different version of this. Boris Johnson has no concept of commitments anyway, and therefore to him, so their words, whatever. They mean what I say, it means what I do. He had no concept of what he was signing up to, didn't care what he was signing up to, didn't think it was terribly important what he was signing up to. Still doesn't care, and still wonders why other people now make a big deal of it.
Didn't Hitler...
Why are these people picking on me? It's the kind of thing the sense you get from him is that, he's living in his world. Actually, I mean, I do... I'm not Dominic Cummings' biggest fan either, but in his reference to the shopping trolley, I think he's spot on Johnson. He should know. He worked with him enough. We lost Alex for a minute.
No, he's back.
Yeah, sorry. Didn't Hitler do the same thing with the peace treaty? He just, when he said it was signed, he just threw it to the side and was like, it's just a scrap of paper. It's absolutely meaningless. It's really narcissistic. Oh, am I still on?
Yep, you're still there. Yep.
Yeah, it's really narcissistic behavior. It's nothing else matters, and it's not overly shocking either. I mean, he said, don't believe a word he says. I mean, look at the number of mistresses he's had and ex-wives. He's cheated on a lot. And it's funny because sort of people don't want to take that into account when voting for him. But it's like, well, if he's cheated on his missus, then why wouldn't he just cheat on the public as well?
But he lies about the good things. That's what one of the Brexiteers I remember hearing saying. David, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I got the idea and I got the impression, and you hear this from Lord Frost on a number of occasions, that there was a political problem, that there was political stalemate, and they needed to sign this agreement in order to break this political stalemate. And this gave me the impression that Boris Johnson signed up to the withdrawal agreement in order just to sell something to the public, because he realized, look, this thing is going on. If I'm able to sell something to the public, I can win an election, and then we'll deal with the detail later.
I think on Johnson's part, I think that's what he does. I'll just work it out as and when it comes. There is reasonable suggestion that Frost didn't actually want to sign up to the Northern Ireland Protocol. He thought, as he has continually thought from the day of his appointment to, today, he thinks that the EU's making all of this up, and one more push, one proper push, and we'll win. And so there's reasonable suggestion that Johnson, because after all, Johnson negotiated this without Frost in the room. Johnson did it, and Frost was like, no, but we were about to win. And the Frost's behaviour is constantly, we're always about to win. But unfortunately, every time that he wants to, launch a trade war or break, or do whatever, breach international law, something bad happens, like Nissan come and say, we're going to close down in Sunderland if you do that, or the US say, you can't do that. And, Frost is just this sort of, he's the one who constantly wants to, say, we can go further. And that, constantly Johnson sort of says that, but then has to pull back, because ultimately Johnson did not get elected by having Nissan pull out. I think that would be the end for Johnson, which is why that Nissan has been so sort of symbolic. But equally, he also can't really anger the Americans. So ultimately, it's Frost and all the others going, we can do this, we can win, and then Johnson saying, yes, we can do this, we can win, and then going, oh no, I can't actually, I'm going to have to back down. And that's just going to continue, as far as we can see, for quite some time to come.
It's pretty impressive that, I mean, I saw Nancy Pelosi talk, I saw the head of the US Senate talk, and the president of all talked, and they all seem really, really angry. And it seems that Boris Johnson has actually given the Republican Party and the Democratic Party something to be unified over. Both seem to be hacked off. Because I think it was Clinton, but it was a congressional Republican. It was a Republican Congress under Clinton that sealed the Good Friday Agreement. And of course, it's a Democratic president. So you're like, right, but you've got all the Irish ties over there, and we're not going to get a trade deal. They're not going to do it because it was interesting because Trump was going around going, well, we'll get you this great trade deal. And then he suddenly quieted down. And it was probably because he suddenly found out that no one in Congress, both parties, were going to back him because they were like, this is awful because of the Good Friday Agreement, which we helped broker. Well, that's been quite an important piece of legislation for America.
Of the 300 million US citizens, about 500 million have Irish ancestry, and and there's genuine cross-party, bipartisan support for Ireland. They regard the Good Friday Agreement as more or less theirs. They had to sort out. To be fair, but President Clinton did do quite a lot for it, but they regard it as their achievement. There is a small wing of the Republican Party, which is not particularly popular in the overall Republican Party now anyway, which was the sort of transatlantic, let's have a bash at the EU kind of wing. And it's well funded because it's well funded by US agricultural producers who want to sort of smash the EU's ability to set the rules so that they can sell their hormone beef and chlorinated chicken and all of that, those good things. So it's relatively well funded, but it's not actually got much support in America. But the problem is those, and they're centered around the Heritage Foundation, those are the people the current Conservative Party talks to. So the current Conservative Party, when they talk to the Heritage Foundation, thinks, they love us. And then they go on the Capitol Hill and say, we can let us explain. And yeah, I've actually had trade friends of mine have been in round tables with UK government ministers. Well, they've been trying to explain, the joys of Brexit. And, they're better actors than I am because these guys, message me sometimes from within the meeting going, I'm a good actor, but my jaw is otherwise would be literally hitting the floor for what complete guff these guys are talking. So it's that reality gap, it's, there's just these levels of reality. They're just in a different reality, as a good blog by David Allen Green last Friday or Thursday said. These guys are just they're just off in a different place, I'm afraid.
It's almost like they don't read, research, look at history. Like it's such a bubble of ignorance. It's almost unbelievable. Because it's funny you just said there's two things that you said there. The first thing was Daniel Hannan, I think it was on Newsnight, saying, I spoke to loads of senators and they were telling me all these great things about our deal and how it's Brexit. And he's talking to a Republican senator who's on the trade committee, who's like, I'm on the committee. We haven't talked about having a trade agreement with you. And just to make it really, really clear, you guys have about, I think it's like 1.6% of trade with the US. You're not a priority. You're not going to be a priority. And I don't see how you come up with this conclusion. And then Daniel Hannan tried to argue with him, trying to suggest that actually he doesn't know what he's talking about. Yet he is, I think he was vice chair of the trade committee, and it's like, what the fuck?
But wasn't it Andrea Leadsom who was arguing with the former chief of the WTO about how the WTO operates? Was it? So,
but Andrea Leadsom did provide a little bit of comic relief in all of this because she said, let's make Northern Ireland a free port. Now she said that on Twitter and
put her name to it in the Twitter.
She thought it was so good that she said it again. I think in Parliament. There's just one small problem. We're talking about not having a land border or a sea border. A free port would have to have borders all around it. So Northern Ireland would have a land and a sea border. So well done, Andrea Leadsom. You just invented the maximum border solution to Northern Ireland.
Can I just ask David, why, when these people say these ridiculous things, why don't they disappear politically? This is something I don't understand. Like, they've been wrong on every... what's his name, John Redwood. John Redwood has been wrong about pretty much everything. And he's still, quote unquote, relevant. How is that possible?
Can't explain the mysteries of the universe to you guys, I'm afraid. Maybe you guys know. I don't.
I think it's because he's got too much. I think there's just too much support. I think you've seen, going back to the Cameron years, you saw that increase in sort of like that Euroscepticism, the threat to, we'll leave the Conservative Party and we'll cross over and we'll become UKIP MEPs, UKIP MPs, not MEPs, and just that basic threat, and then constantly causing trouble, threatening, we'll do this, and then of course that led to the referendum. They then won the referendum. They then pushed as hard as they possibly could to trigger Article 15 as quickly as they could. All this action that they've done, I think at the moment there's so much political clout sort of in the parliamentary party, but when you look at the non-parliamentary party, which is mainly sort of a lot more moderate conservatives, but there's been that UKIP infiltration since 2016 as well, and they've put it forward a lot more libertarians. And of course, the whole dream, of course, of the Brexit, as Patrick Minford gave the game away. I'm sure you'll be very well familiar with one, Patrick Minford, David. His dream was, right, we're just going to leave the EU, then we're just going to set all our tariffs to zero, and it'll all go well. It'll all be wonderful. And he's like, as I'm sure David will say, that's not how trade works.
Numbers don't tend to come out top on the usual surveys, of which economists' forecast turned out to be accurate. Let's just put it that way. He has interesting views on how the world works, which appear to be somewhat at variance to how it actually works.
Well, David, what's the
Yeah.
David, what's the problem with setting tariffs to zero for those of us who don't are familiar?
Well, actually, tariffs is generally not a big deal anyway outside of food. We don't pay that higher tariffs. You've had tariff reduction going on for 75 years across the world, so largely it isn't that much of an issue. You do have tariffs on food products, and they're there for a number of reasons. One, there's an element of protecting domestic farmers. It's mostly thought most countries actually want to, in some way, protect them. Not all do. Another is to give preference advantage to developing countries over massive agricultural producers like Australia or Brazil. So it's not really about the tariffs anyway. It's about the sort of differing regulations. And the other issue is that if we reduce them to zero, if other countries still do have tariffs, even if they're 5%, that can be the margin on a car, even 5%. So we're not necessarily at the moment paying 5% on cars that come in. We have free trade deals with Japan, Korea, and Europe that mean that we don't actually pay tariff, and Turkey. We don't pay tariffs anywhere, most of the cars that come in. If we set them all to zero, we're then at risk that if their tariffs go back up, if they, for example, end the trade agreement, we've got no negotiating power, and then we're stuck. In danger. That forecast as well from Minford said, yes, we'll reduce all tariffs to zero, and by the way, we'll no longer be a manufacturing power. Now, it's possible under Brexit that in any case, because we've put up so many trade barriers to Europe, in any case, manufacturing is more likely to suffer anyway, because as small manufacturers, part of European supply chains, have already been finding out, with the barriers, basically, we have more trade barriers now than all 30 than the next 30 nearest countries to us. So it's not a great place. And actually, the way our trade is shifting is generally from that sort of directly traded commodity like manufacturing. In fact, people are finding it easier to, for example, make films in the UK. So we're doing quite well on that, where people just come here and pay us here. Bizarrely enough, it's easier to get visas than it is now to send manufacturing parts to Germany or something like that.
I just want to read
that's trade in a nutshell.
I just want to read a couple of super chats and then we can continue. Sorry, Cahill, thanks so much for that. Good morning, all. Have you seen the government's Northern Ireland Protocol impact assessment? Yeah, dated October. We were talking about that earlier, October 2019. Roisin, thanks so much. Richie Neal's speech at the border in Ireland is very good. And Alexander Campbell says, Brexit politicians are ignorant, incompetent, corrupt, and unfortunately over here. Yes.
Yeah, but apart from that...
Sorry, Alex, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I watched a huge chunk of Patrick Minford when he was talking to the committee. It was also interesting to see that a lot of the committee members from the Conservative Party just didn't understand what he was talking about. I think Sahaway, who ironically now is the Education Secretary, really struggled to understand what Patrick Minford was getting at, but it seems to be the blueprint that the Conservative Party is following. But the other thing that I found quite disturbing, that they haven't, not disturbing, but like foolish on their part that they didn't get, was Patrick also said that he suggested that we go high end in our production and sort of make high end goods. But in order to achieve that, you need a high educated workforce. I mean, we've just talked about this Queen's speech, you know, of what they could be doing for the education. I mean, one of the simplest things I would do is just reduce classroom sizes. Right, you can't have more than 20 kids in the class. End of. That's a simple way of like resolving this as an issue. When I say simple, it's obviously more complicated than that because you've got to have the right number of teachers available to be able to pump into the classroom. But that would be one thing to upgrade the education system. Not doing anything like that. They're just trying to make sure kids are going into the classroom, which then persecutes a group of kids that can't go into the classroom because the schools haven't been funded properly. If you look at the private education sector and that's my graph. So if this is the private education sector funding per pupil, we were until 2010, guess who came into power around then, we were on par with public sector and private sector on par together. Since 2010, funding per pupil has reduced and it's suffering as a consequence. And yet that was a key cornerstone of what Minford was saying, was that you want to build high-end products. We can't do that unless you've got a high-end education system. And they haven't got the brains. They haven't got the brains to figure out on how to improve the education system. You know, there's statistical data that shows exercise and eating healthy improves your thinking. Shock. Who would have thought of that? But there's no policy of like, right, let's make sure there's a free breakfast, a free lunch for every kid coming into school. Let's make sure they're doing exercise every day. It's none of that. And or shrink the classroom sizes so you got 20 kids in the class. They do not have, in my opinion, the capability and intelligence required and creativity required to get this country up to that next level that it needs to if you're going to follow a policy of Patrick Minford's. And by the way, I'd never follow that policy. I think the whole thing's just been a complete and utter ludicrous attempt at ideological nonsense.
Is this, Alex, in your opinion, by design or through neglect? The way a combination.
They're so ideologically driven. Conservative Party in history comes off at points as being pragmatic as well as ideological. They've completely scrapped the pragmatism and just gone straight for ideological stance. So I was aware, and David, please correct me on this, but I got the impression from the Europeans they were really baffled by how obsessed we were about our fishing territories. And like fishing, I think, is 0.1% GDP of the UK economy.
It's the size of the lawnmower industry.
No, I think on fishing that's not actually right. I think that all European countries who have fishing fleets know that they are politically important out of proportion to their size. I mean, they're generally baffled by the fact that the UK government has chosen lots of trade barriers and seems to be making a virtue of trade barriers. But I think they understand the fish. In fact, if anything, they're baffled the fact that we don't seem to be wanting to protect our agricultural producers.
Oh, wow. There's one question I want to ask you, David. We always hear a lot of the protocol isn't working, but they never actually say, what about the protocol isn't working? So I suppose my question is, how does the current protocol work? Like if you're a manufacturer, how does this sort of
it really depends what your flow of products is. If you are a retailer or a wholesaler in Northern Ireland and you're trying to bring in goods from Great Britain and sell them there, it's not working. It's real pain. Particularly depending on what the goods are, if it's food, if it's certain food products or whatever, it's a real pain. if you're an exporter from Northern Ireland and you're exporting to the rest of Ireland or indeed into the EU, it's working really well. Thank you very much. I like some of this. If you are producing in Northern Ireland, you want to send to Great Britain, you're a bit uncertain because the UK government hasn't quite worked out what the rules are for that, because they promised there'll be no checks, but that's actually a bit awkward to do. So yes, there are problems, and if because the UK government signed up for Northern Ireland to follow EU rules, if there's divergence in EU rules on things like food additives change and the UK government doesn't follow suit, then you've got problems for example, the supermarkets who are based in Northern Ireland, but who are getting a lot of their products from Great Britain. So, yeah, there are problems. Most of them were entirely conceivable. Indeed, they were thought through at the time of signing, but they were kind of ignored. I actually did some work soon after the protocol was signed, where I sat down with a lot of industry bodies and went through a lot of the problems. And there are problems in things like medicines. How do Northern Ireland medicines follow EU rules in areas like potentially falsified medicines? There's some tricky conversations, and here's the thing: you're never going to solve them all in a simple way. So this is where the EU's kind of slightly wrong, because it thinks you can solve them all, and one bag and you're sort of done. You're never going to solve them all. You're always going to need a regular dialogue to try and go through all of these things and work out how you're going to deal with them. Problem with them from the UK side is not very interested. And Northern Ireland business was just trying to work this out. It's just saying, please, UK and EU, can we have an arrangement where we sit down together and talk about these things? And even that is not in place because the UK government has refused. I think the EU hasn't refused. The UK government has.
So I'm going to ask you to Mystic Meg this now. Get out your crystal ball.
I don't need a crystal ball. I've got the documents and trade. You've got it right
there. Where does this? I suppose this is splitting into two questions. Where do you think, in your opinion, is this going to go? And also the other question is, if this goes badly and this goes into a trade war with the EU, what happens?
I'm assuming the reasonable assumption is that nothing actually changes. We have lots more threats, lots more climb downs, lots more sort of extensions of grace periods and whatever, and nothing whatsoever gets resolved. Quite possibly the Northern Ireland Assembly doesn't meet again. Somehow we avoid having elections again, and it all just waits for another government that can actually try and fix this. And a lot could depend. If Johnson carries on as Prime Minister, I do think a lot of it does come down to him personally. If he's replaced, even we don't know who it would be, but there is still just about a sane wing left in the Conservative Party. Even they would want to just deal with this. So that's my crystal ball is no trade war, no resolution, carries on in this depressing way, and we carry on talk about it. Sorry.
Can I just ask you, David? And then I'll let you jump in, Alex. No, this week, Maroš Šefčovič, the Vice President of the European Commission, pointed out that the UK government had agreed to provide live data through a system to the European Union, and they haven't done that, and instead they've sent fixed data or static data. But if this is a requirement of the protocol, it means that the UK government is not upholding its side of the agreement.
It's really hard when you get into those kind of details to know who is sticking by what rules or not, and I prefer not to go there. It's pretty obvious. If you were having a serious conversation, I'm sure you would find things that both sides were doing wrong. But because the UK government is so egregiously wrong and is is playing the role of arsonist, when you're playing the role of arsonist, the fact that somebody might have wired the building wrongly matters less than the act of arson, and I think that's what's going on.
Okay, thanks. Alex, sorry, you wanted to say something?
David, what would you say then is the solution to this?
It's essentially there's no real. It's a bit like the Northern Ireland peace process and the Northern Ireland Assembly. There's no real actual solution because you've got the situation where it's not quite, but let's call it this. Half of the population want to have seamless ties with Ireland and the EU, and half want to have seamless ties with the UK. You can't deliver that with Brexit, just as you couldn't deliver their identity as being both Irish and the UK. So what you have to do is you just have to manage it on a kind of fairly intense but low-key basis, I think, involving all parties and some interminable processes that just sort of, in which you're basically constantly working out, right, what's going to happen with this one? Are we going to align, or are we going to have a border here, or are we going to do this? And it's dull, but I think that's the only way you can actually do it. It's not a great answer, but it's the best I can come up with. Lots of people say to me at the time, but it'll be United Ireland, or that'll be, the EU will have to go and get stuffed or whatever. No, ultimately it's going to be some really tedious, muddled process which somehow gets us through. That's pretty much what's happened in Northern Ireland that's the story of Northern Ireland over the last 25 years. So you kind of learn from history, and that was kind of John Hume's great insight that I always come back to, was like, we don't need somebody to win or to lose. Somehow we just sort of muddle on together, as long as we respect everyone's aspirations equally. Something like that.
Is therefore going back into the single market? Because the problem I see is, if we stick with where we are, you're always going to have unionists going, there's a barrier between us and the UK, which we don't want. And they'll always have that opinion, and it'll stoke tension. Is going back into the single market
Yes, everything will help. Alignment will help. Going back into the single market would help. Customs union could help. But I'm assuming that none of that happens. Maybe it will in 10 years. But in the meantime, we've got a problem to solve before any of that happens. And the way not to solve it, but the way is to manage it. I'm just assuming none of that happens. But lots of things could happen. United Ireland could happen, or the EU could break up, or Ireland leave the EU, or whatever pick your event of the future of choice. But actually, the chances are none of those happen in the next 5 years. So we've just got a problem and a situation to manage, so let's just kind of manage it and wait for one of the other big things to happen.
I don't. Can you hear me, guys?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I think I have a Zoom problem. But anyway, David, no, just wanted to ask you: could this be resolved in a gradual process, in the way that businesses in Northern Ireland are adapting, and they're finding suppliers, for example, in the EU instead of in the UK, in Great Britain? Do you see that being the eventual outcome of all of this? And then the issue the issue of actually importing stuff from Great Britain becoming less and less of a problem, because you're actually finding it somewhere else. No,
I don't think that fully solves the problem. So yes, a little bit of that happens. So various little things happen that help a little bit, but I don't think that ultimately fixes it either. I think there's no solution to some mind-numbingly tedious process that takes this all off the front pages, kind of. And the likes of me have to do this tedious stuff, rather than we're not used to this limelight.
Alex,
me in particular, I hate it, obviously.
Sorry, we have. I just, before we get to Alex, there's another super chat from Gareth, who says, "Morning, lads. As your resident Northern Ireland expert, I just wanted to give an atabai to the Alliance Party for skewering the DUP. P.S. F the Tories." Yes. So, Alex, can you tell us a little about the Russia report?
This has definitely gone under the radar, but after the Russia report, the Security Committee for UK Parliament came out and said, we want to know what happened with you and Lebedev. So Lord Lebedev, he's the son of a KGB officer. His dad ended up buying the Evening Standard and the Telegraph, and he's been using those newspapers. His son's been running those newspapers, and his son has been promoting Boris Johnson since he was mayor of London. And when Boris came into power, Lebedev suddenly got given this position of being in the House of Lords. Now, he's only been in, I think, twice or three times. So there's some good with that. However, he's still being given this title. Part of the title also had to come from Vladimir Putin, because he's, I think it's Hampshire. I think he's Lord of Hampshire and Siberia, and he could only become Lord of Siberia if he got Vladimir Putin's go-ahead. So this is all quite interesting. But the rumor is that Boris had been told that he couldn't be given.
Oh, I think we have a problem. Oh no, we've lost the connection, guys. I'm very sorry. I think Zoom has a problem. I don't know if you guys in the chat can hear me. Technical problems today. Apologies for that. We'll see if we can get the guys back. The Tories got him. Apologies. I'm not sure what happened there. We have a technical problem, but I think I can only hear you. Okay, I think we'll end it here. Unfortunately, Zoom problems today. Apologies for that, guys. We'll try and get the guys back again. I want to say thanks to everyone for coming on today. I'll try and get on to the guys if we can get them back, but I don't know if I'm able to do that. So I'll just say thanks for everyone. Thanks to David for speaking to us. Thanks to BowlerHatMan. Do check out their channels and their links in the description of the video. And thanks to the moderator for doing a wonderful job. Thanks to everyone for sending a super chat. And thanks for your support. Apologies once again for these technical problems. I'm not sure what the hell is going on here. Hopefully, I'll keep you guys updated on the next brunch. And if I don't see you next Sunday, see you during the live stream. Apologies once again. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you all soon.